Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here. My dear friend Cliff Schechter took me out for coffee when my dad passed. About a week ago, we got together after, and one of the things he crowed about immediately after we had talked about the myriad of issues that he helped me distract myself from what it was going on by getting back into the political talk,
Uh-huh.
and he brought up the fact that you and David Schuster have recently sort of broken a story about the Venezuelan boat strikes and the details around that are kind of bubbling to the surface. And I don't know if you guys have an opinion about the political ramifications, whether Hegseth will have to pay for this in any way other unless without Democrats coming in power and doing it themselves or being fired. But tell everybody sort of, I think most people are familiar, there's been about 9 strikes. The news was out that there was a second strike on a boat which had 2 survivors, killing them. But your story went even beyond that. So if you give us the encapsulated version, then
Right.
we'll talk about the details of it and the like.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on. I'd be remiss if I didn't say hello to my kids. My kids are super supportive of my work, but today, especially, they found out that Hal Sparks was, and I believe they referred to you as Mr. Davenport, I think
Yes,
was what they,
yes, that's right.
yes.
That's right.
So they're
Obviously, they
super
were raised
excited.
well. All right.
Right. Yeah, I'm super excited to be here to continue amplifying this story. I myself am a Navy veteran, and so I have connections still with veterans and active duty, and I have some sources in the DoD and beyond. And on October 20th, late at night, I got a secret or a secure message, and they dropped a document that really blew my mind. And so it took me 47 days to get that document onto a senator's desk. I used
Wow.
super cool
Whoops.
veterans. It was sort of a mission that we all went on together to get that document where it needed to be before we went public with anything. And once the document was with the Armed Services Committee, and once the sources had legal representation, and only when they were comfortable did we go ahead and talk about this publicly. So, what happened was there was a boat strike, and there were 2 survivors,
Hmm.
and those survivors were picked up and brought on board the USS Iwo Jima. And there is standing shipboard protocol that when you bring anyone out of the water, a lot of ships vary in what this protocol says. It can be a shipwreck survivor, anyone, but typically across the board, anytime you pull someone out of the water and pull them onto a boat, you are going to document that. You're going to have video documentation.
Hmm.
So shipboard personnel headed down to begin that video documentation, and immediately right on the deck there was a conflict where Marine personnel pushed back and said the order had come down from the Commodore that there was to be no video. There was a little bit of back and forth, and ultimately the PAO, that's the press affairs officer on board the ship, went ahead and ordered that the video be taken. So video documentation was taken of the onboarding. There were cameras set up in the med bay. One of the detainees was in bad medical shape. Of course, they had survived a boat strike, so that's not super surprising.
Hmm.
Um, and then about 26 hours later, they were repatriated. There was no trial, no tribunal, no evidence presented, nothing. They were quietly repatriated to each of their alleged home nations, one to Ecuador and one to Colombia. The Colombian president made a statement that day that this individual was received back in awful medical shape, was on a ventilator, and the other went back to Ecuador, and both of whom their governments have released them from any type of criminal charges because they've both said there is no evidence that
Yeah.
either of them were in the act of trafficking drugs. And so what's interesting about this, and not just interesting, but it's a really messy diplomatic situation, is you've got a medically compromised detainee being returned to his home country after being in the care of U.S. military personnel for over 24 hours. And so it leaves us vulnerable to the Colombian president saying, how do I know that you didn't further harm this person more than they were obviously hurt in the boat strike? And since we no longer have that video because the admiral ordered the deletion of that video footage. So all of the footage that was taken of the onboarding of the detainee was deleted. When the order came down, the enlisted personnel pushed back. They pointed to protocol, they pointed to code, they pointed to Geneva Convention. They argued against deleting that material. Ultimately, they were overridden. The order apparently came down from the Pentagon to delete that footage. And that is something that is truly, as you can imagine, unprecedented.
Yep.
It's a huge, huge red flag.
Yeah. Well, okay. So that sort of how high it went up in the hierarchy is my primary question. Obviously, I don't know that Hegseth feels the need to ask Trump about any of this stuff and can give him plausible deniability because Trump basically just said, do what you got to do. And that's a colloquial enough language where he can feel like, well, I didn't mean commit crimes. I just meant within the law, right? It like gives him room to wiggle around this,
Right.
even if the SCOTUS hadn't given him broad room to, get away with a lot of this stuff. So when it comes to Hegseth, though, Hegseth does know what's legal and what's not legal and what he got a direct order from the president to do or not do. And if the president ever decides, no, I wasn't saying commit a crime to do this or violate these kind of things, even if he comes to that, Hegseth is still on the hook for either kicking it up the
Right.
chain or taking responsibility for it himself. Now that we know that order to override and even the leadership on the boat or directly in charge of that particular directive in the Navy, whoever was controlling the kind of whoever the funnel was from the Pentagon for all those ships, whatever interactions they would have, is still following what Hegseth says as the head of the Department of War.
Right.
So the legality of it, I mean, I don't know what the defense of we might be in another Abu Ghraib kind of a situation where the people end up being hung out to dry, even though they clearly got orders to torture people and have that, and with,
Right.
don't pull back because these people are monsters and Cheney wants them basically killed, but you need as much information before they die of natural causes because if you're hung upside down for days on end, naturally you're going to die. So that's natural causes. That even though it went to Cheney, who ended up getting in trouble for it was the soldiers that participated in it. And I think that's
Exactly.
one of the reasons why a lot of these people on the boats might be going, hang on a fucking second. That's what happened. And when Democrats get back in power, there may be, there'll be a John Yoo circling of the wagons around Hegseth and Trump and, whoever else he was filtering this through, where the working stiffs in the Army and the Navy should have known better, right? And hence the seditious six. That's
Right.
Do you think? Oh, and this is interesting because the timing of that video kind of corresponds with the window you're talking about of getting this video and getting it to a senator's desk and them maybe spreading it around. Do you think maybe your efforts in this area might have cued them that there might be a necessity for this video? I mean, it looks like it overlaps.
Right. I do think so. And there's also CNN just reported this morning with a statement from Pete Hegseth, which adds an additional layer of perplexity on this situation.
Mm-hmm.
That CNN reported this morning that the strike actually happened on the 16th. I've been trying to obtain when the strike actually happened because the detainees were brought on board on the 17th.
Mm-hmm.
So either you have people in the water for 24 hours
Right.
and one of them medically compromised, and what was going on that day? Well, if you go back to the 16th, what happened that day was Admiral Halsey said, I'm out of here. So I
Mm-hmm.
find it curious that we've got a strike potentially on the 16th.
Right.
Then an admiral resigns. And then the next day, there's an order come down to pick these guys up out of the water, the survivors out of the water, and
Expunge
follow
their
the protocol
existence.
with all of that,
Right.
and then delete the footage of that. So this is a messier and messier and messier situation as it unfolds.
I think one of the questions that will have to be asked in, in any kind of congressional hearing, and again, we need Democrats to take over all these places for them to actually happen and be realistic. Although I do think there are a lot of Republicans out there who, again, don't want to be president of the United States of Russia, and that they do want our rules to apply, even if they think they apply differently. They still want it. They do want these rules to actually exist because they understand the value of them, even if Trump doesn't, even if Hegseth doesn't. And so they're going to, there may be a surprise pushback leading into the midterms to try and, it's a
Right.
great window for them to distance themselves with both the choice of Hegseth in the first place, which squeaked through, and Trump's sort of protocol in this area and distance themselves from that. Maybe they take advantage of it. But the question would be is, what time did Halsey say I'm out? Was there a moment
Right.
where he literally walked off station and said, I quit, specific to the attack? Was the attack and then I quit, and then, or was it, if you guys don't pick these guys up, I quit, and then, they pick them up. They say they don't have them until the 17th, but they actually picked them up on the 16th because of when they were dropped off later, and he quits while
I've
they're
verified with
deleting the
the
video, right?
source. Ultimately, the source I have is someone very close to the situation, and he's verified and re-verified that they were brought on board on the 17th.
Gotcha. Okay. So, and are we talking about like 1 a.m. on the 17th, or like
No,
they
they were brought
floating in the
on
water
board around 1500, so that's 3 p.m.
wow. So yeah, so they were at least in the water minimum, 13 hours, 14 hours. So the
Right.
night, it may be a night strike, because most of these are night strikes because that's when the boats go because they're harder to spot and blah blah blah. At least they think so.
Hmm.
So let's assume, dusk is is your window. So at least in the water since 9 o'clock the night before. And one of
Right.
them, maybe why he's on a ventilator and the like is because he was left afloat there while an
Right.
argument was happening on this fucking boat about picking these
Hmm.
guys up. So that means, does that mean that the admiral was out maybe even before this strike in particular, and this is why they thought it kind of all bets are off?
Well, I think that what we've seen with the
Yeah.
first double strike video, a scenario that I could see being very realistic is the admiral not wanting a repeat of that. So we have
Right.
survivors, okay, that
Mm-hmm.
are floating there. We can see them, and we're not going to do a double strike. We're not going to hit again. So
Yeah.
yeah, I can see a scenario in which there was discussions while these guys are floating in the water. What are we
Right.
going to do? What,
Right.
we're not doing another strike. I'm not doing it.
Yep.
So how are we going to proceed? Right.
Which is I mean, that it's a sort of testimony that may happen at some point. Again, only if Democrats take over, probably. But there might be a little wiggle room for this, where you got a almost Pentagon Papers level admission of what happened on that boat, and the fact that he quit because they were going to double tap these guys, and then after everybody around them realized, well, we can't hit him again because if he's willing to quit about this, right? If he's willing to walk off, then the rank and file know they're not going to participate in another strike, and then that gets really friggin' noisy. That gets where
Right.
the guys, the soldiers that would be in charge of this are going like, no, if the admiral walks off this and is not going to follow this order, neither am I. So fool me once, you can't get fooled again. So they're in that situation, right? and then that's where they're standing around going, what do we do? They're right there. If somebody else picks them up, then where are we? Right?
Right.
They're on the evidence. What if there's no drugs in that
Hmm.
boat? What if they were smuggling
Right.
something else?
See, that's the thing. You have to look at that situation and say, okay, if you're out here making the case to the American people that these are narco terrorists, and then you have two of them, you have them. Why
Right.
on earth would you not take photo and video and do the old school, like in Dare where they would lay out the table of drugs that they
Right.
confiscated? Why would you not collect that evidence?
Well, I guess because you're predicating the idea that it will continue no matter what, and that you're being tough on this. You're trying to sell. It's Trump's way of wagging the dog without declaring an
Yep.
actual new war, because he's trying to get away from the Epstein stuff. So looking tough by killing some bad guys is the way you do that. And he's too friendly with the UAE and Qatar and these other groups to go after terrorist groups right now, because that's their buddies. So, because he got a whole new golf course he's putting in and stuff. So it really is hard to. You used to be able to wag the dog in the Middle East. Maggots in general are not fond of these, quote, never-ending foreign wars, right? That was one of the sales pitches.
Right.
So what's the never-ending war that they could probably reinstitute that a lot of them do believe in, and that would be the war on drugs. And specifically after the fentanyl crisis hit rural America particularly bad, and was, killing a lot of, like, lower middle class white kids at college who thought they were taking an Adderall pill and then they start dying. That's where you think maybe the motivation is there. House, by
But
the way,
again,
it's
wouldn't
just
you
break.
want to
Yeah.
collect that evidence?
Right,
Right?
exactly.
Like,
Yes.
again.
You'd want to beat your chest. Like, we see these boats we're
Right.
stopping. Like, even if it was we shot the boats that were going to get away, but we caught all the boats we could, and look at all these drugs. And look
Right.
at this Colombian, and look at this, Nicaraguan, and they're working together. So we got to talk to the governments of both of these, because this guy's cousin is a general that works, like that kind of stuff. That's what you would do that
Right.
parade. By the way, it's, I guess, breaking news that the House Democrats have just announced articles of impeachment against Hegseth.
Excellent.
Yeah, so, which is good.
Excellent.
Now, the question if they actually go anywhere is one thing, but I guarantee the White House will push back onto it in a brutish way. Say,
Right.
you wanted to protect drug runners. Like, I don't even know if that, to your point, I don't even know if these are drug runners. How the fuck are we supposed to know?
Yep.
The evidence is at the bottom of the ocean. And it's,
Yep.
even if it was drugs, the salt water will turn it into something else. You can't even chemically test it and go, this used to be cocaine. It'll all dissipate. So
And honestly, I feel like if we were blasting, kilos and kilos of cocaine into international waterways, environmental groups would be all over this. They would be testing the waters. They would be
Right.
opposing this.
Right, yeah.
I mean, because
all of our
the
swimmers are
results
swimming
of
way
this
too
could
fast.
be-
Right.
Right. The result of this could be, can you imagine Kosh Patel announcing Cocaine Shark?
Yeah.
I
Oh, yeah.
mean,
Right. Yeah.
Re-
I mean, the movie itself. I mean, it sounds like a Steve
Right.
Bannon production.
Right.
He's got production money to throw around. But you're absolutely right. Well, I will say, for the record, though, salt water would dissipate cocaine and turn it into something else. So it's one of the ways
Right.
you destroy most drugs. So it won't survive or whatever. The way it doesn't even survive bath water most of the time. So I guess they're counting on that. But it also, again, helps them get rid of the evidence. If it's a screw up, or if they lied, nobody is to know, because the boats are gone. Hence, the second strike was almost as much about the vehicle as it was about the people, because they were floating
Right.
on the remnants of the boat. It was overturned, and one of the things was
Correct.
they were. Am I off that there was part of the argument was that they had to be struck because they were going to signal to other boats because they were swimming back to the pieces there,
Right.
but like
They
that.
were reaching for the radio.
Right. Yeah. So if the radio was still functional, then the boat was still there. You could pull it out of the water and go, see, this is where the drugs were hidden. Here's some remnants of it that's still there, all that. But then you have to be sure in the first place, before you open up that can of worms, that there are actually drugs on board. That they actually are doing that. That they're not smuggling, like information. Like that they don't want to transport crypto, for example. They could be hand delivering
Right.
crypto wallets back and forth as part of something, and and maybe that's why we'll see Don Jr. scuba diving down there in the near future. But the reality is like this is obviously a big thing. So I want to ask you, in your in your process of this, because I'm fascinated by this as well and the great work that you have done. And by the way, everybody can go to the Blue Amp Substack, Blue Amp Media, and Melissa and David Schuster have this article up on there right now. I recommend you subscribe to the Blue Amp Substack anyways. Great work being done there. And specifically this, I'm always like this, without giving away, source kind of stuff or whatever, like how this kind of starts rolling and you're kind of like, oh my God, this has to, I mean, because I'm sure that maybe there's stuff that's kind of percolated up that could be dismissed by the uppers as kind of disgruntled soldiers or, seamen, whoever it is, and it won't go anywhere. And some stuff gets to you and you're like, yeah, I get this. I hear this a lot. Versus
Right.
this is gigantic.
Right. When I got it, I read the document. It was 10 o'clock at night on the 20th, and I was already in bed, and I got back up and read it and reread it and was like, am I reading this correctly? Because this sounds like deleted evidence. This sounds, it was so just, it blew my mind. I had a TSSCI security clearance. I worked with crypto materials on board the USS Eisenhower when I was in. And whether you're talking about photo and video or you're talking about crypto, the order to delete is really unprecedented. That's something that anybody would push back on. It's so unusual. And so there's a term that JAG used to send this order down, and that term is unprivileged belligerence. And I think we're all going to hear a lot more of this term, because apparently this is the little gray area loophole in the Geneva Conventions that Pete Hegseth has chosen to use to identify these narco terrorists as the alleged narco terrorist. And the thing about unprivileged belligerents is they don't get the same Geneva Convention protections as either civilians or actual POWs. It really is a convenient loophole. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the U.S. has used this loophole before, and it's been in Guantanamo Bay.
Right.
So whenever we've used this loophole, it has not come back as a good PR look on America, because it allows us to not afford the humanitarian rights to the people we have in our custody. So using that term, I found really, really interesting that they're choosing to say that of photo and video would be attributed to that. To me, the process of capturing photo and video is just as much to protect the American military as it is to protect the detainee. So now we have a situation, like I said before, where we have an individual in our care for 26 hours, just shy of 26 hours, delivered back to his home country on a ventilator. And that country can just say, you made, which essentially we did, we issued the boat strike, but they can say you didn't care for him properly or you wounded him further, in which case, if we had video, we could say, nuh-uh, we've got video. Look, this is how we cared for him the entire time. But now we've thrown that away, and we do not have any evidence of how those two individuals were treated while in the care of the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Marine Corps.
Whether
that is a diplomatic disaster.
Right. And which is, we have no way of assuring people that their injuries happened in the strike itself, even if you thought it was justified. This could just be like, yeah, you brought him on board and went after him with a fillet knife. Right, to try and get information out of him. Like, that's why, I mean, ultimately, oddly enough, that's why there were a lot of photos of Abu Ghraib. Curiously enough, was this concept of, and by the way, for people who are listening, it's belligerents, TS, as in plural, as in group of people. These people are unprivileged belligerents, as opposed to unprivileged belligerence as an act, which would be the defining, I guess that's, you could define Trump's campaigns as almost that. Like he is an unprivileged belligerent in his own thing. But here's why in the sort of the way the Geneva Convention describes him is like civilians who pick up weapons that are laying on the ground and open fire just get dropped even though they may not be wearing a uniform, and therefore you don't have to treat them like as a civilian now because they're carrying even if they in this moment decided to join the fight without joining the army,
Right.
they still count as an army person, and so they can be put down the same way an army person is. If they are captured, they do not have a coordinated understanding of the circumstance, so they're either a terrorist or a non-state actor, right? And this is where the
Right.
designation of cartel people as terrorists is very
Right.
dubious, and is ultimately the whole thing. All of this is predicated on, because in a war on terror, the unprivileged belligerents, uh, uh, that's that you could be treated like that as a deterrent from civilians, picking up guns and joining into the fight or whatever, because
Right.
you don't even have the privilege of being a POW if you're caught. But in
Right.
designating terror groups, all terror groups, technically speaking, under the authorized use of military force and stuff, do fall under this category.
Right.
Because
There's
they, yeah,
I'm trying to remember the guy's name. There was a Canadian Brigadier General Kenneth Watkin, who I consider to be the foremost expert on the term unprivileged belligerents. He's written um, essentially novellas on the topic. He's written for the Harvard Institutes of Justice on the topic. And so he has broken down how America has repeatedly used terrorists to align with that term unprivileged belligerent so we
right,
can get out of affording them humanitarian protections. And he had kind of gone quiet. His last paper on the topic was like 2017, I believe. But just about 6 days ago, he wrote again. And from his expert opinion, he didn't speak so much to the unprivileged belligerent, but in his expert opinion, these boat strikes are unlawful on the face of it, which would
yeah,
then make any resulting action unlawful. And I think that Hegseth is using this, what I find really shaky sort of legal
yeah,
ground, to state that any boat that has drugs on it that is sailing northward towards the United States is, by conducting that activity, committing an act of hostility. And therefore, those on board are no longer simply civilians, and yet they are not a part of a collective army. So this is how he's packaging them, as unprivileged belligerents.
right, yeah. And again, I do believe that the concept of the unprivileged belligerent in battle is a reasonable one. I don't get quite why they wouldn't get, if you caught one, they wouldn't get POW protections. I guess it's because there's
Right,
nowhere to return them to. So
right,
in POW protections, you would return them, let's say in a prisoner swap. Maybe that's the value difference, is that I'm not going to change a terrorist for an American soldier to the government that might have our soldier. I mean, I get
right,
but there's some equivalent therein, is that we can, it falls into the legal aspect of criminal behavior and extradition, that we can
right,
also, engage in releasing somebody from our jails to somebody in like Russia, to get, one of our prisoners out. Then maybe that's that there should be a secondary definition to these folks that follows that this has more to do with an exchange of criminal prisoners than POWs or something. But it doesn't mean that you let them sit there with
right,
a gaping wound in their femoral artery. So,
right.
but the reason I
And
think,
to
yeah,
speak into that,
yeah,
most legal precedent since the 1949 establishment of the Geneva Convention has said that in when there's doubt like that, you're going to initially begin treating them as a civilian. You're going to classify them as a civilian if they are not in any
yes,
way visibly affiliated with the combative force. And then if you're going to declare some individual or group of individuals as unprivileged belligerents, there is supposed to be a tribunal, even if it's in the field
yeah,
tribunal. And there is no evidence
right.
whatsoever that such a tribunal was
And if there
conducted.
was, it got destroyed,
It got destroyed.
which means, the assumption would be, if they did have a tribunal, they realized they were wrong, and that's why you get rid of it.
Right.
Beyond the fact that they may not want to even bother treating them, and they just don't think it's important, and they deleted it because of this administration is all about show, and they realize the power dominant theme and eyeballs on evidence. The boat strike video they thought would be macho and cool cost them more than it gained them, even amongst the MAGA big chunk of the
Right.
MAGA was not fans of these. You got Rand Paul, riding Trump's ass on a bunch of these things, but he's not alone in this. There's a lot of, run of the mill Republicans that thought this was absolutely wrong, and opens up a whole can of
It
worms
is.
about like sanctioned behavior by other countries that we can't push back on anymore because we're engaging in it ourselves, right? That's always the concern. That's how this stuff comes about. So I guess the next question I have is, how would evidence be gained to? I mean, let's say they stop right now. I don't know if there's been a strike in the last week. I have to look at when the last one was, but that they are shifting tack away from this, hoping it goes away. And that, or if they're simply not reporting them. That's the other thing. Is that if the
Right.
one thing they have on their side is that if they are drug boats or they are smuggling boats of any kind, it just don't brag about it and it goes away. And
Right.
that might be where they're shifting tactics to, knowing that this is going to play out badly for Hegseth. And just these, it's not like you can undo these two strikes. So, how many, and this goes to your time in both Navy intel and then, the people that you talk to or whatever, ballparking on this strike, the people in the chain that would see this or participate in, from the admiral who gets the order all the way down to the seaman that carries it out. How many human beings are we talk maximum and minimum in this window, that there's a potential for somebody to break away and go, I'm not going down with this ship, no pun intended, right? Just as far as the
Right.
volume, normally in a circumstance like this, just in a call order strike, how many people were within
Oh, at
earshot of
least a
it?
dozen.
Right. Okay.
At least a dozen. Right.
Right. And
And
those,
from the evidence that I saw, this was something that was witnessed by multiple shipboard personnel. Again, just the sheer fact that when Marines are coming on board and shipboard personnel begin executing their standard protocol, there's a conflict. So you're seeing this ineptitude and
mhm.
this confusion leak down all the way from the Pentagon to the point where Marines and sailors are arguing in the moment over what protocol to follow, who to listen to. I've never seen or heard of anything like that in my life. You are trained on protocol. Protocol is what you do. There's no questioning it,
Right.
especially in the moment. So that is just utterly shocking, and I think it's really, really indicative of the state of the enlisted servicemen right now. They don't know what to think, who to listen to, what to follow, when they rely on their instincts to go back to follow protocol, to follow what they've practiced, what they've been taught to do, and there's pushback on that in the moment. I can't imagine being in their place.
Yeah. Well, and okay, so you are told the protocol about how to operate and all these kind of stuff, but then the Hegseth comes in with this whole like, we're restoring the warfighter ethos, that kind of thing. That constitutes probably in his mind a shift towards, we're on a war footing in general, no matter where we are, which is not the case, right? That and there's a difference. There's, you're not talking about like decisions made on a battlefield and Saving Private Ryan, where you're standing across from a bunch of dudes in Nazi uniforms and people that might be supporting them. This is a boat on a ship, in the middle of the water in the middle of the night. You're not even hailing it to stop and blowing it out of the
Right.
water. It's not even close. Like it's absurd.
Right.
So that's where I feel like the argument is probably happening, because they're aware on the one hand of this protocol that they've been taught, and then on the other hand there's this secondary new protocol that he's trying to enforce on everybody, that we're at war. And the argument is like, yeah, but
Yeah.
Are we? No, this isn't war. They're not firing on us. These are not enemy combatants. They're not members of Al-Shabaab or fucking Hamas or whatever. They're not, this isn't Yemen and our boats are going through a area where they're, like off the Barbary coast in the 1800s where they're seizing ships. They are, if anything, trying to avoid us.
Right. Exactly. And the fact that they're not an organized army, they are not a nation that we have declared, no act of Congress has been stated that we're at war with anyone. And part of what myself and the other veterans that were involved in getting this into that closed door Armed Service Committee meeting is just anger. We're really, really angry that there are now enlisted servicemen and women in the Navy and Marine Corps who are held hostage on these ships. A lot of
Right.
people say, well, I know what I would do. I would say no, I would refuse the order. Well, what happens when you refuse an order in the moment is not pleasant.
Yeah.
Typically, you are immediately yourself put in the brig.
Yeah.
And there is a captain's mast held if you're in the Navy. There is a process that happens if you choose to say, no, I'm not following this order. And it is not a pleasant process
Right.
for that individual. So the sheer fact that they are putting, you got to remember the average enlisted person is 18 to 24 years old. These are young
Yeah.
people. They don't even have their wits about them in life yet, really. All
Mm-hmm.
they know is the orders they're given, the protocol they're given, and what their training is. They are attempting to follow that training and then receiving pushback from their superior officers when they are thousands of miles away from their family, out
Mm-hmm.
on a ship in the middle of the ocean that could potentially become a combat zone at any moment if we were to strike Vietnam, or I'm sorry, see, Vietnam comes
Yeah.
out,
Yeah.
Venezuela.
Right.
So I am furious that our enlisted men and women are being put in this situation. I know a lot of veterans that are furious about this.
Right. And the problem is if it's not curtailed, obviously it metastasizes. At this level of like
Right.
freedom to participate in this kind of stuff, it gives, if there's, if nobody is called before, a committee or a tribunal about this order or whatever, then there is no reason to not do them, and it becomes the protocol. And then
Right.
you have a strike order that, everyone would be aware is, on a caravan of migrants or something like that. That strike becomes legal after time because they're viewed as enemy combatants, come up here to, they are civilians hiding terrorists among their group for the express mission of destroying the United States. Whatever like you can hear the Hegseth argument in this or whatever. There was the phrase, kill them all, let God sort them out, famous the Marine
Yeah.
patch that goes around. Okay, most people don't know that comes from a Catholic bishop in trying to find the Templar Knights. At one point, after they had retired, some of them had moved into these small cities, and they were such good people that the townsfolk wouldn't tell the bishop and their army where these people were so that they could be tried and killed. And there were 4 of them in this one town, and the I guess the leader of the military force that the bishop had brought said, they're not going to tell us, they're not going to out these people, and he said, kill them all, God will know his own. And that's where the phrase initially came from.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an element of it became this kind of macho call to, that like that's not my problem in war, which you can argue. If you're in a field and half the people are dressed in army outfits and half of them aren't, like you're in Vietnam, and you know that people are intentionally, because of your rules, dressing in civilian garb specifically to sneak past because you're not allowed to shoot at them, how long would that last? 2 days, a week, right? That kind of thing.
Right.
So obviously these things are born out of a reality, but but when you don't put leadership in that is aware of the value of that reality and the limited nature of it, that becomes a tool for abject lawlessness. And that's that's where
Does.
Trump has run away with these, like we're all like, he's breaking all these norms. And it's apparently these norms, we didn't know they needed to be laws for most
Right.
people. And the same thing is true of like,
Right.
you're saying like, can't imagine something like this happening or haven't heard of anything like this happening before. You could argue that it was like maybe whatever, Charlie Company in My or, Abu Ghraib or, those kind of
Right.
things do show up. And they are precisely why people turn on an administration and a military exercise, whether it's a war or the war on terror or the war in Vietnam, or in this particular instance, this bizarre kind of version of the war on drugs. That,
Right.
yeah, that even the goal of it and the focus on Venezuela seems strange to most people, most maggots. So
Right.
yeah, uh,
Well, it goes back to, George Washington's opposition and many of the founders' oppositions to having a standing army. Because if
mm-hmm.
you have a standing army, situations like this can occur where the people, the citizens that are represented by this military, are not bought in to the mission of
Mm-hmm.
the war we're supposed to be in. And so if you don't have a standing army and you have to rely on going around and rounding up militia, they have to feel passionate about that cause in order to grab a musket and leave their house. But if you have a standing army, you can use that standing army to become a bludgeon to bludgeon your way around the world, whether or not your citizens are on board with the mission. And this is why there are tomes, there are volumes of military protocol and standards and code and Geneva Conventions to control and to keep a lid on this behavior and to make sure that our military is an apolitical, unbiased force. And
Yeah,
once you start a situation where you're asking young enlisted men and women to listen to a man over the code, to listen to a leader and his agenda over the standing law, over international law, we are in majorly treacherous waters.
yeah, and again, there becomes there's also sort of a breakaway from this that happened in Vietnam. Arguably, it happened in Iraq a few times, where the soldiers themselves, who are on the side of this kind of warrior ethos kind of situation, go further than the orders. That they're given, because they're like, I know what he
Right.
means, and they end up mowing down a house full of people who are having a wedding because there's too much light coming from that house, and anybody who would be doing something after dark during this period of time is clearly it's probably a secret meeting. Better to safe than sorry. And we had multiple instances like that in a couple of these places, even if it was just fog of war or people going going native, as they would sometimes call it, or just losing touch with reality. This idea that you just have, you guys are here to kill, kill, kill. That works when you're an infantry that's controlled by those people. Once you get the order, when I tell
Right.
you to jump, you say how high. Those are in concert with each other in military training. You are in
Right.
the kill, kill, kill mentality, but only where I point you. Because if you start killing the wrong
Exactly.
people, you make the problems worse for us. Well, there's a issue with where Hegseth almost wants this like illusion of a bunch of Rambos running around. They know who they're supposed to kill and who they're not, and if they kill a couple that they're not, then that's just shit happens and file it away.
Well, he talked about that in his book. He literally bragged about the fact that after receiving an official, orders from people way above him, he turned to his little company because they wouldn't give him a whole platoon. They
Right.
only gave him a few people to be in charge of. And he turns around and tells those people not to listen to those orders. And if you're in the heat of the moment on the battlefield, you do whatever you feel that you need to do. So he already bragged about
Right.
doing this in his book. And so someone with such a fundamental misunderstanding of the reason we
Right.
have these protocols and rules and safeguards,
Right.
putting him in charge of it's unconscionable. Like, I can't even
Right.
fathom it.
Right. Well, and the irony is that none of these guys seem to get the message of the pop culture stuff they seem to be following. In the case of,
Hmm.
like, I'm always, I like to remind people that Rambo 3 is dedicated to the valiant people of Afghanistan. And that, the second one is about him, like a bunch of these movies, about going after POWs who are being kept in secret places, tortured, all the awful things we're against. And that's why, the character in it is the good guy in this is because the other side does this and we don't.
Right.
And what Hegseth and those guys have just acquiesced to is like, why don't we? You know, they're this close, it seems, to going, well, if ISIS beheads people, like they're, you know, isn't
Right.
this they even like decapitation strike as a phrase. They used it in some ways about the Iranian nuclear program and those kind of things. So
Right.
I think they feel untethered not only to the rules of the Geneva Convention and the standard of like who directs war in this country, which is the Congress, but I think even to speaking on behalf of the humanitarianism of the American people. And this is where I think they might be running up against a wall and not realizing it anyways. And you know, my question is, and this is, we only got about 12 minutes left, and people have a couple of questions I'm sure in the chat room for you as well. It's been such a great conversation, and again, I want to remind everybody, go to the Blue Amp Media. Let me see if I can find this up here. Yeah, the Blue Amp Media Substack, and take a look at. There we go. This article, and do you have a follow up coming up? Are we on on the are you
Oh
working
yeah,
on the next
I'm
chapter of it?
working on. Yes, because I'm working on clarifying what happened on the 16th. Was the strike on the 16th or the 17th? And I don't want to call anybody out, but I found the CNN reporting just a tad sloppy in that it really sort of was fuzzy on
Mm-hmm.
that detail. And
It
so,
really
yeah, I'm
matters,
working on a second piece to clarify that.
especially when it comes to when did Halsey take a powder? You know when,
Right.
right? That's crucial because it means he was either reacting to it or after he left they did this and they either had second thoughts about just second striking this one after so it worked that he left,
Hmm.
or they struck it and they were going to do it again. He refused to carry the order out, and other people did it for him. So those people knew full well that he thought it was an illegal order, wouldn't follow it, and they did it anyways. So like that, there's so much to that. And thank you for drilling down on the details of this. This is the very thing that when we talk about like Trump and Epstein, this whole idea that he kicked him out of Mar-a-Lago for being a creep that they used to sell for a long time. And and I would say, first of all, it's a lie. We now know that he was
Hmm.
making it up, and that he was hiring people away from the spa and that kind of stuff. And he had underage girls working in the spa at Mar-a-Lago. What the hell is that?
Yeah.
And yeah, already a problem. But then apparently according to the apocryphal tale, he only got mad when Epstein went after the rich kids at his, that the members of his club had that were there,
Right.
and he didn't give a crap when it was just the local white trash, girls on the cheerleading squad at the local high schools.
Right.
They're not worth saving. So it makes it even worse for him. Like he only cares about his rich buddies and members of the club. He didn't give a damn what his
Right.
buddy Epstein was doing for decades. So it makes it even worse, their way of fixing it. There's similar things in this, is that their explanation on these things in many ways just gets worse. And what do they fall back
Yes.
on? National security? Is that going to be the? They're just going to circle the wagons and claim this is we can't tell you the details of these two enemy combatants that we had to turn back because of national security. We do have information,
Right.
but na, right?
Well, this
Uh,
was exactly why my sources were so insistent that this not go, and they, there was conversation with the New York Times, and the sources said absolutely not. We are not talking to the Times. This
mm-hmm.
needs to get to the desk of someone who can conduct oversight,
Right,
and then, and only then, are we willing to talk about it. And even then, after I was able to confirm that it was in that committee meeting and that it was brought up as evidence in that committee meeting, and that my source on the ship had legal representation and felt comfortable, and then they asked that I tell the story. And that's most likely because I've been in the Navy, I've been on board ship, and I could write it with verbiage in a way that I insulate as much as possible so that we keep them safe, because I think they are going to throw them under the bus. They are going to charge them with something for even sharing this information, even
right.
though there was no security classifications on those documents whatsoever. So they didn't share anything confidential.
Right.
It wasn't even so much as Mark's secret, which was also mind boggling to me
Right.
in and of itself. But it wasn't. They didn't share anything confidential. But I think you're right. Enlisted men and women, traditionally to this day, mostly come from lower income homes. That's
Mm.
where they go recruit. They recruit in
Yep.
low income neighborhoods.
Sure.
And I think you've hit on something there, that he's not going to feel any kind of way for throwing junior enlisted people under the bus, because they're going to be just like those poor white girls at the club.
Right. Well, and Trump, we already know that, like, I want to say it was like, I don't know, 15 years ago or something, but this is like one of these Trump talking. He didn't want his sons enlisting in the military. There was this story that came out that if any of them did it, he would disown them. And apparently, Don Jr. had thought about it, through like officers stuff, but he was just like, it's embarrassing. Like Trump thought it was embarrassing, even if you just went the officers route through university and ROTC. But ultimately, he views that exactly what you're talking about like low income people using the army as a stepping stone to moving up the class ladder in many ways,
Right.
through building respect, through putting their lives on the line. He views that as a welfare program for low income people. He said it for a long
Right.
time. Like, it helps these assholes get a house and stuff that they wouldn't be able to get if they just had to work a regular job. So they join the army, and we have to, bow down to them or praise them or whatever. And this is right in line with his whole, like, I like, heroes that weren't captured, stuff with John McCain,
Right.
like stuff that I don't know how any military people support Trump at all.
I
But
don't
for
either.
the belief, I suppose, that they think that there's an enemy out there that is unseen, that is greater than any threat, and like, be it Iran or Islamic forces who are going to do another 9/11. There's a lot of 9/11 trauma in a bunch of people that are like, look, I give a shit about housing policy and food banks and stuff like that. None of that will matter if Islamists blow up our fucking infrastructure. Like, I get that's where
Right.
people pack in. Post 9/11, there was a lot of that. And the war on drugs,
But
yeah.
also,
Good.
I think we're at an age with veterans where almost all the veterans in the last, what I would consider, honorable war, are dead. So we
Mm-hmm.
have veterans from Vietnam and Desert Storm and Operation Iraqi Freedom, which I fought in. And you've got all these veterans who, after the fact, look back on what they were asked to do. They look back on the global nature of the conflict, and they realize they were used for something that was not ethical, that was not moral. We were lied to.
Right.
This narco terrorist thing feels exactly like
Yes.
weapons of mass destruction to me. And so you've got a much wiser and more aware veteran class than you had 50 years ago. 50 years ago, veterans may have full throated, thrown their support behind this guy, but these aren't the veterans you have now. And I've been in DC multiple times at marches and rallies over the last couple of months, and I am seeing tremendous amounts of veterans
Yeah.
coming out, and even veterans holding signs that say things like, I'm a card carrying Republican and I don't support this.
Right. It seems pretty. It's amazingly cut and dry, and maybe that's the part that they're not counting on, is that there's this hubris, that the Trump administration has, that they think they've got a certain group of people in their pocket, whether it's law enforcement, military families, that kind of stuff, and they assume that because there are so many, like, fervent true believers that will parade through the White House, that means if they've got those people, like the evangelicals, that they have all the Christians in the country, or that if they have,
Right.
because Paula White is standing there, she's indicator that she's got control of them, and it's almost like a multi-level marketing scheme where these are just clients and she's in charge of keeping them in line, and if you have her in line, you have them. And I think they believe that about veterans in a lot of ways. I mean, Trump sold this idea, and I hammered this till I was blue in the face, and he stopped doing it, and I take credit for this for a while, and then he brain farts and brings it up every so often randomly, and then stops again. He keeps taking. He says he was responsible for the VA Choice Act. 50 years they were trying to do this. VA Choice Act was signed in 2014 by Obama.
Yeah.
Hal Rogers from Kentucky put it on the. It was a Republican. It was bipartisan. It was across the board. Everybody agreed on it. It was one of the. The only thing that passed easier than that was release of the Epstein files. So it wasn't a big deal. he had to sign the paperwork on the, well, it's been 3 years. Is it working? Sure. Well, let's keep going. Some of it
Right.
had a sunset element to it. And he thinks or he wants to sell the idea that he was behind it, which is an embarrassment because he's hiding behind veterans. He's using them as, I would
Yes.
say, human shields in this regard.
Right.
This taking them for granted part around this stuff, assuming that they are dumb, will follow orders, are
Right.
cowed, doesn't it seems maybe because he skipped Vietnam successfully through the help of Bone Spurs and his dad's buddy who's a doctor,
Right.
that he missed all the stuff with John Kerry testifying, and certainly the point of all the movies that he thinks are macho movies about Vietnam and stuff. Like, he didn't see Platoon. He certainly, if he watched the first Rambo First Blood movie, he didn't see the end monologue, which is
Yeah.
and the fact that this whole thing was because of PTSD, and nobody would listen to him about the awful they were asked to do. Like, he missed that part.
Right.
It was just like, he showed them what for. Like, it's just stupid. Like, he missed all the
Yeah.
point. And I think he still is, and Hegseth certainly is, because it's it's cosplay for him, just like Patel at the FBI.
And
It
that makes that much more accountable. Donald Trump has never done an honorable thing in his life. He wants to talk about the word groceries like it's so, and when you really think about it, that man has had food presented to him on probably a golden plate every day of his life. He's never had to go to a grocery store.
right,
He just, the
never.
the term is funny to him because it's
Even his
comical
wife
and
doesn't do it.
quirky. Look at
His
this
his none
word.
of it. It's
But
not even like he has a traditional family situation where I
right.
made my woman do it, which is how he talks. But she doesn't do
Right.
the shopping either. Like, yeah,
Right, but he's never served. He's never gone and given his time and his energy and said to his nation, "I will be willing to step up and potentially lose my life in defense of something greater." Pete Hegseth has.
right,
So shame on him for throwing younger enlisted people under the bus with issuing these ridiculous orders to delete video. Shame on Pete Hegseth because he's taken that oath and he should know better.
right. Well, he also is probably one of those guys who watched A Few Good Men and thought Jack Nicholson's character was robbed, and
Right.
doesn't understand why defending the Constitution of the United States and everything that it stands for is what should curtail your behavior from the basest instincts that you might have, because once you
Right.
cross that line, the country ceases to mean that anymore. If the enemy wants to turn America into something else, an authoritarian religious state or something like that, you help them when you don't apply our laws and our rules. You aid
Exactly.
and abet the enemy. This is support for the enemy. This is, if you're saying maybe ISIS is right in how they kill people, then ISIS has won. They used to do this whole thing like, if we don't go, if I don't have the freedom to go shopping, the terrorists win, right? There's an element of, if we torture people, the terrorists win. If we cross our
Right.
own lines, and that doesn't mean you have to be naive in a firefight about something, but after the firefight is over, you both have the resources and the standards to
Right.
live beyond and above that. We're at the end of the hour, but I so appreciate you coming on. I'd love to have you on when your follow up comes out, so we can pick up
Absolutely.
where we left off with this, because this is so crucial. And I always talk about the articles when you read them in the New York Times or something, or USA Today. It depends on whether there's color photographs or not. This is the decision. The third paragraph is always the yeah, but. They tell the story. It's kind of the clickbait is the first two. The title might draw your eye. The third paragraph is, it might not be this. It probably isn't. But anyways, where was I? And in USA Today, it's the fifth or the seventh, because they make them smaller. They just divide the paragraphs up into smaller
Yeah.
chunks, right? More readable. But one of the things that that yeah, but is about is that's where the detail comes in. Where it might not be sexy, but the details might point out that actually, if you look at the numbers, it isn't this. But everybody's saying this, and we're talking about what everybody's saying, not what's actually happening.
Right.
This is an opposite situation where the yeah, but part of this leads. They're saying it was this. They're saying it was this. Yeah, but he quit on this day, And it may have been before or after. This is details we need to find out, and this requires
Right.
congressional oversight, legal oversight into this that matters for the country. And you know like the betrayal of the Constitution and the American people that occurred in Abu Ghraib, that arguably is in what
Yes.
what Charlie Company did in My Lai. By the way, very little attention is paid to the other soldiers that stood between them and the civilians, and said fire on our own soldiers if they open fire on these civilians. That was heroic. That was people holding the line. That was people living up
Right.
to the standard. They don't get nearly as much credit thanks to the Seymour Hirsches of the world, who's all yeah but, all warts and and no skin. But there's a crucial aspect of this. The details matter, and you being on that detail is so reassuring and so inspiring, that my chat definitely sees it. They're all singing your praises, about how what a great guest you are. But also, it's because the details are what they're trying to gloss over. And when the act of doing that is exactly why you're like, okay, we need to look deeper at the exact timeline of when this happened.
Right.
As the day went on, who left their station and said, I won't do this? Who was punished? When were these people brought aboard? Why? This is now a murder investigation. And that, from a true crime fixated populace, is something people can wrap their heads around. Um,
Right.
and it is very
And that's the I always, whenever I do anything, any appearance or anything, I like to leave everybody with an action item. And today's is really easy. Go grab that article, send it to your elected officials and say, you need to be asking where that video is. You need to be asking why we deleted videos of foreign detainees on a US Navy vessel.
right. And I am putting that link, by the way, in the chat right now, so that people can do precisely that. It is going out to Facebook and Rumble Facebook and Twitch and YouTube and Instagram, folks. I will put that in a separate thing as well for you guys. But you can go to the Blue Amp. Hold on one second. I'm gonna pump that into the, so everybody's got it in on all of the multiple channels that I'm on right now. This is really crucial. That these details need to dog this administration. If we can't, because I've often said they have no shame. They're incapable of being shamed, because you have to have empathy to be shamed. But they can be
Right.
embarrassed in the case of Trump, being seen as weak or being seen as out of the loop. And so the one area
Right.
where Trump might be in a mood to kick Hegseth out is if Hegseth embarrasses Trump by Republicans and a lot of other people suddenly going, this is a crime and it's terrible, full stop. And Trump didn't know about it, or Trump okayed it. Which one is it? And so Trump
Right.
will throw Hegseth under the bus. That's what he does. And then we'll start getting to the bottom of it, even if it's Trump just covering his ass.
Mm-hmm.
So it's so crucial. So anyways, I put that link out. We'll do it again. And then when you have that next one out, I would love to have you on. I know David's going to come on, later in the week or next week or something. And so, this is a story that's crucial to us staying on, because the cascading effect of not doing something when something like this
Right.
happens defines the behavior of the military. And Trump's got another 3 years. I don't think he's going to make it. I think the general
Right.
consensus is the doctor we had on the other day is saying 3 to 5 months maximum. And but if Hegseth outlasts Trump, Vance isn't going to kick him to the curb.
Right.
And a closeted individual is really good at plausible deniability. So there's a big issue with that, with that crowd, and this. So I think it's crucial we stay on this, and it's a great thing for Democrats to push for, because there is a lot of bridges between them and Republicans, rank and file, especially the ones that have served, that know how serious
Exactly.
this is. Right. Yes, and somebody in the chat room was asking. Yes, the doctor we had on gave Trump 3 to 5 months to live. Maybe with Walter Reed, they can stretch it out to 9 months, but he's seen these people spire. He's a geriatric doctor I had on the other day, and he's like, I thought we're 5 months away from them just limit him to 4 hours a day in public. This guy's like, nope, the wind down is happening. You can tell. And again,
Yeah.
another reason why we have to be dogged about Hegseth, because if it's Vance may circle the wagons a little bit better than Trump is able to, because he's not a belligerent fool in this part of it, and he can lay it all at Trump's feet and bury it. So anyways, thank you for being on this story, Melissa. Thank you for joining me today. I appreciate it, and I'd love to have you back on if you'd like to, both covering this and anything else you'd like to promote and push out there, because this kind of reporting is so rare and so important, and we greatly appreciate you.
Absolutely. I'm so grateful you had me on. I any way that I can amplify this. I feel like I'm screaming into the void sometimes, and yeah, so I really appreciate you getting it out and amplifying it.
Yeah, everybody in my chat room will start pushing it to their people, and this will be one of those pebble in a pond opportunities.
Yes.
I'll also push this out on my Blue Sky and other things, and we'll just keep hammering this. But I also think checking back in with you as the story progresses is crucial. So
Yes.
like feel free. We'll keep in touch, and we'll make this happen, because I think this is really it's important just in a life and death, and in a for the country and for the criminality that's happening. We must stay on top of this. So thank you so much, Melissa Corrigan, everybody. Whatever, and I'll let you go, and we'll talk to you again.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Cheers. There she goes. Hold on. I'll let you out of the thing. There you go. And chat room, thank you guys for being with me today. And thanks again to Cliff Schechter for helping make this possible. Melissa was terrific, and Blue Gal and Drift Glass being on, fantastic conversation as well. I have to say today, we got a lot of action items and a lot of pithy phrases, that we can use and that we need to use with those. Is talk about how the Republicans always, are better at communication and all this kind of shit. I think we reached a tipping point where we're starting to get a grasp on how to message these things in a way that the vast majority of the populace can understand. And I think, if you think if you appreciate we have, police and private security, public roads and private driveways, public schools and private schools, that you have the option in your life, a public option in so many other areas, why not insurance? Why not healthcare? Why not? If it doesn't work, you'll always still have the private to go to. If private is so much better and can compete with that kind of thing, then they will. Private schools, don't tend to bitch about it. And they try. They try to, but the only way they really succeed is by giving a better education than some other place, or connections, whatever. That's the other thing you're paying for in a private school. Postal service versus UPS and FedEx. Exactly. Postal service is a guarantee. UPS and FedEx if you need stuff faster. If you can have a public option, the military, you can join a militia in this country. You can volunteer to fight in another country if you want to, but you got a public army. What if you had to what if your only option was a private army? What if the soldiers in the military only fought pathogens with their rifles? What if they were shooting giant, it was like Starship Troopers, and they were shooting bugs, and you had to, you had to pay for a private militia to protect you from the aliens? Would that work? No, you'd be happy to have a public army. Why not the same in healthcare? So, a great, I think, argument to be made around that. You got a public option everywhere but healthcare. Why? There's no good reason. Make them defend it. Do you drive public highways? Do you drive public roads? Do they have potholes in them? Yeah. Is that better or worse than driving on dirt, or trusting, local businesses to charge you for driving on a road? Right? silly. Like they lose that argument everywhere they bring it up. And it's not socialism, it's not communism, it's democratic taxation. Where do we what is the best use of our taxes? And again, the nice thing about a public option is it's optional. You don't have to do it. If you morally disagree with it, you're not forced into it. It's not Social Security. It's not, Medicare or Medicaid in there. And by the way, none of these people who argue against a public option are opting out of getting their Medicare, when they age into it, or getting Social Security when they age into it. Notice that? None of them are like, as a point of pride, I disagree with this nonsense. I am the government should give my my Social Security checks to Elon Musk as an apology. None of them do that. None of them with the ACA were like wearing a medallion that said "Do not treat" instead of "Do not resuscitate." The DNR, they should have a DNT medallion that they have to wear. And if somebody's wearing that and they're in a car accident, they're like, unless I got enough cash on me to treat whatever's wrong with me, don't treat me. I'm not going to have insurance, so fuck me. Not going to put that burden on the rest of you and raise the price of medical care, right? None of them do that. They all like treat my ass. As Carlin said, if you got a tube, you got a plug, stick it in me, man. So that part of it, you can have a public option everywhere, but healthcare, that makes no sense. Flat out, just say it. Just, it's, and if I can convince a greater group of people to do this and we vote on it, it's not socialism, it's not communism, it's democratic taxation. That's it. Secondly, sticking to these stories, and following them through, but also the action item of sharing that story and that I put in the chat room, and I'm gonna put it in there. I'm gonna put it in a second time, in case you missed it, and pass that along with an exasperated emoji to your representatives. And by the way, they don't have to just be your federal representatives. Send it to your governor. Send it to your state rep, because a lot of state reps are, former military or are in the reserves or in the National Guard as well. Send it to them. So this is a really honorable thing to put to hill to stick your flag in. So do it. And I will argue why a public option, and you guys know I have a better plan for public option than just a federal one. Having a federal one, great idea. But you should also be able to have state ones that you could also buy into. States should be able to set them up. So that you could buy into Washington State, or you could buy into Massachusetts, or you could buy in, if California puts one together, you could buy into those single payer systems. If you don't want the federal one because you're worried about Republicans, sweeping its legs, you can go someplace else where it's better supported. And if you decide at one point it doesn't work as well, you can move to somewhere else, but you're still in a nonprofit situation. Huh? And by the way, you could even keep the Blue Cross Blue Shield, Anthem, and all those guys in their regional only thing, because it would give the state ones a leg up as well, because those would be available to everybody. So there. Also, I would say to anybody who says that any lobbyist group with the most money has the most profit to be able to spread around. If they got people knocking on your door, that's when you should listen. But if they've got private airplanes they're flying you around on and that kind of stuff, what it means is they're protecting, a slice of the pie that they may not have earned, or they're afraid that comers are going to undermine them. That's another conversation for another time. But I think these are two main areas. We've got a public option in everything but healthcare. There is no reasonable reason for that. None. And having a federal single payer you could buy into, or the ability to buy into any state that sells a public option themselves, knowing that any of the profit goes to better the lives of those people there. So if you're in Washington State's one, you can fly to Seattle every so often, and their beaches and streets and infrastructure are paid for partly by your insurance premiums until such time as you need the payment, till you need the care. It may even be such that when you buy into these systems, part of your medical care is that if you're getting some kind of specialty treatment, they fly you there. So you can use their medical infrastructure there as well and not just have everybody be in a network. I'm just saying, there are options here. Let's work it out. Yes, but Cosmic Rose is right. Right now, vote blue no matter who. I don't want to hear shit about anybody about how beating their chest about turning a blue area bluer. Waste of fucking time. Waste of fucking time. And you're endangering people's lives. You're endangering people's livelihoods. It's an infight that need not happen. And it's based on a fallacy that you somehow have convinced the entire world that they should magically agree with you. If that's all you're focused on, all you're saying is, my arguments only work with people who already agree with me. Then you suck and get out of the way. My arguments work with people in the purple areas very well, if you've noticed. And I bet you sit me down with somebody from a deep red district, I'm way better at dragging them into the purple, right? Than somebody who's like, I'm a fighter. All they're going to do is yell at this person, call them fucking stupid. Whereas I can convince them that they're being stupid, and therefore they might cease to be stupid, or at least not be so loud and proud in their stupidity, which again is a win. So there you go. Anyways, chat room, thank you guys so much. Great show. I will see you later this afternoon for the afternoon show, Hal Sparks Mega Worldwide. Like, subscribe, give a thumbs up, support the show, etc., etc., etc. And patreon.com/HalSparks. The Venmo is right there if you want to help the show. Thank you so much to people that have been giving and saying nice things about my dad. In that I'm trying to figure out a way that I can post the people who Venmo, just their name, as a thank you on the regular thing here without it being some sort of weird cut and paste thing where I have to hire somebody to do it, along with, like PayPal and Cash App. It's not something that happens that frequently, but when it does, I want you guys to know I see it and I appreciate it. And Summer will tell anybody that I get a little notification on my watch occasionally that says somebody donated, and it's later, it's after the show or someplace when I'm just walking around and somebody's watching a video and they just did it, and she's seen me tear up at how lovely you guys are, especially during the current unpleasantness. So, anyways, to make you feel better, Hal, boo hiss. Thank you for booing me. Appreciate it. Go watch Brian. And I love you guys, and I will see you later. Take care of yourselves and take care of somebody else. You're awesome. Don't forget it.